Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. We'd like to start the program with the recitation of Qur'an.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسماء ذات البروج واليوم الموعود وشاهد ومشهود قتل أصحاب الأخدود النار ذات الوقود إذ هم عليها قعود وهم على ما يفعلون بالمؤمنين شهود وما نقموا منهم إلا أن يؤمنوا بالله العزيز الحميد الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء شهيد إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ذلك الفوز الكبير إن بطش ربك لشديد إنه هو يبدئ ويعيد وهو الغفور الودود ذو العرش المجيد فعال لما يريد هل هداك حديث الجنود فرعون وثمود بل الذين كفروا في تقدير والله من ورائهم محيط بل هو قرآن مجيد في لوح محفوظ صدق الله العلي
Salawat again. Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. Just before we start the next part of the program, can I just ask, I'd just like to make a couple of quick announcements. Firstly, Maryam Marvasti, the mother of Ali Marvasti, who comes here regularly, had a stroke, but she's getting better. She'd asked if we can just pray for her, so please keep her in our prayers and our du'as today and in the future nights, inshallah. Surah Fatiha. Also, earlier this week, Maryam Banu by Jan Muhammad, the mother of Dr. Salim and Shalina Jan Muhammad, passed away. So please can we all recite Surah Fatiha? Surah Fatiha. We're now going to continue the program with a marshiya from Muhammad Mandali. Let's welcome him in Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad.
Salawat. Bazaar of Sham we now have come. See the state Zainab's in. Support for Arba'een. Bazaar of Sham we now have come. Akbar, my youthful one, who shall I call upon? Bazaar of Sham we now carried out Zainab, O my master, on Muhammad Ali Akbar. Oh, those of you who are mothers, oh, the sisters of love, brothers, come beat your chests and grieve. For whom shall I bereave? Bazaar of Sham we now have come, clothed in the holy sand and ore. Khak-e Shifa's my overall. O Prophet, mercy to mankind. See how your ummah's been unkind. Will Rubab ever find her innocent young child? Bazaar of Sham we now have come. I hear the people saying in Sham, revenge is all we will demand. We will avenge Ali's command. His wives and daughters we will surround. Rainfall of stones befell. No fear shown of hell. Bazaar of Sham we now have come. These Muslims took the Prophet's name. For true Islam they're but a shame. This was glory, was all they sought. A battle with Hussain they fought. Zahra's Hussain they killed. With tears my eyes are filled. Bazaar of Sham we now have come. Hur heard the cries of Allah Tash. He felt that he now had to rush. He had to make a choice and tell. Choices between heaven and hell. Zahra's handkerchief he got. Heaven he also bought. Bazaar of Sham we now have come. See the state Zainab's in. Support for Aberdeen. Bazaar of Sham we now have come. Salawat.
Ahsan. We are now going to start the main talk, and today it's being done by Shaykh Imranali Panjwani. Let's welcome him. Salaat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. On the night of Arba'een, the title is Challenges of Prophet Muhammad and Imam Hussain alayhi salam, Quranic parallels and doctrinal and philosophical implications. Dr. Imranali Panjwani has lived, studied and worked in the UK, Middle East and Australia as an academic, lawyer, chaplain and community worker. His work combines his diverse legal, cultural and religious experiences and has been commented on by both judges and lawyers. He focuses on the reformation of both Islamic and Western legal systems so that greater attention can be paid to the subject of the law and the rights of minority communities. Salaat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sorry, just can people please move forward, especially on the men's side, so that when people come, they can fit to the back. So, Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. As far forward as possible, both on the ladies and gents side, if possible.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب صلوات جزاك الله Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. My condolences to all of you on this night of Arba'een and in the remembrance of al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam, his beloved family and his companions. And it's an honor to be with you again and remember the family of Rasulullah, peace be upon him. The purpose of this lecture is for us, inshallah, to deeply understand the connection between al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam's stand in Karbala to the Prophet's own stand in his time against Abu Sufyan, Jazakallah, and what reform the Prophet was trying to bring to his society through the Qur'an. And I'm humbly sharing this with you because perhaps as Shia Muslims, it's easy for us to give that great status to al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam because Shiism stems from following and remembering Ali alayhi salam as opposed to the other companions of Rasulullah after his death in terms of leadership and in terms of sunnah, in terms of character. But at the same time, this title is also for all Muslims. Do all Muslims universally and resoundingly remember the stand of al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam as they may do with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? I was in Jordan for a few months. I was doing some refugee work, and by grace of Allah, I was able to visit Palestine as well and go to Masjid al-Aqsa, a very blessed place. I think after Makkah and Medina, or in that same line, and according to a hadith, the whole earth of Masjid al-Aqsa is full of barakah because all the prophets walked there or prayed there, or Prophet Zakaria visited Maryam salamullahi alayha. Is a place, of course, of Mi'raj of Rasulullah. There's a lots of maqamat there. But of course, as you all are aware, that the Palestinians are greatly oppressed. And I saw that for myself when I visited the refugee camps. They only get water twice a day, and the way they're harassed and these things. I mean, that requires another lecture. The reason to share this with you is because when I was traveling in and around the region, and I was there for Ashura, by the way, when I was visiting the various masajid and shuyukh giving khutbah, of course, with respect to all Muslims, there was barely a mention of al-Husayn alayhi salam stand and his stand in Karbala and what it what it meant to Muslims and Islam. And we should all, of course, be brothers and sisters in faith, no doubt. This is not a kind of sectarian point. But the fact that perhaps there's a gap in Muslim history or a different way of perceiving Hussein alayhi salam, as if he's disconnected from Rasulullah, as if his stand is an event in history which he did against certain rulers or a ruler, but that's of a different time period, a different connection to Rasulullah's own time in history. It's as if they are two separate events. This is my humble experience, just kind of visiting in and around the region, living with our fellow Muslim brothers, and perhaps I felt that there needs to be more of a recognition of exactly what Hussein stood for through the Qur'an. Not through just the lens of sectarianism, not through the lens of Shia and Sunni, forget all that. Through the lens of the Qur'an itself and the words of Rasulullah himself. Salawat, please. And the second point, it's a reflection for us. We may cry over Hussein ibn alayhi salam. We may do ma'atam. We may do azadari. And it's very easy sometimes to forget what exactly were the principles Imam Hussein stood for, apart from generally saying it's justice and fighting injustice and opposing a corrupt ruler. What doctrines did he stand for? What particular principles did he stand for? Like in any subject we study or our children go to school, they learn the principles of English language or the principles of maths. Well, what exactly are the principles of Karbala? Since a young age, even teenagers in my early 20s, whenever I used to go to masajid, yes, alhamdulillah, we used to commemorate, but those fundamental questions were never answered for me. And to this day, I still feel they're not always answered for me. So to the extent that when I did visit Palestine and I saw the oppression, my first thought was that when I came back to the UK, how much infighting Muslims do over sects, over doctrines, over who is preaching what on the mimbar. So much infighting. You get WhatsApp messages, somebody said this, somebody said that, and this community is not united with this one and whatever. And I just said, Muslims are being oppressed and killed and occupied in Palestine. And I saw some atrocious things, to the extent, for example, that when I was visiting a refugee camp, the guide told us that there was a fence there to get through the camp, and a mother with a baby needed medical help. And the doctor was not allowed to go inside the refugee camp and had to give an injection, I think, to the young child or the baby through a metal fence. Or I can give many examples that if you go through certain checkpoints, there are Israeli soldiers there with guns, big rifles up to their head. And even me, for example, I have, of course, British passport. They would still come in the van and harass you and speak to you, what are you doing here? Who are you? Are you Muslim? This, all these questions are there. And you're just going through certain checkpoints, either to get to Masjid al-Aqsa or to travel outside of Jerusalem. And, okay, this is me as British person. The Palestinians I met, had a lot of conversations with them. Many of them cannot even visit Masjid al-Aqsa, even though they live around the masjid. There are so many things. It requires another lecture. But I'm sharing this with you because that's the reality of a situation. It's the most occupied territory in the world, completely segregated. And yet when I see, we do Muharram and we do Arba'een, what are these principles that Hussein stood for, and are we putting into effect in society as privileged people living in the UK and the West and living comfortably? Do we actually take stock of this message and implement it practically, trying to stop internal division and trying to help our fellow Muslims? So this is not a sectarian message. This is why I began with the words that al-Husayn al-Islam stand is a universal event for Muslims, or it should be. Salawat, please. I don't know if you can put the PowerPoint. I think I gave it. Shukran. Thanks. Yeah. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay. Sorry, I thought the PowerPoint would be bigger. Don't worry about it, okay? The first slide, you could just read the title, forget the rest. Don't worry. So it's an easy lesson, okay? the Qur'an and the Prophet as the foundation of al-Husayn alayhi salam stand, okay? I'm beginning with this slide because these words of Husayn alayhi salam are from Maqtal al-Husayn by Khwarizmi, one of the maqatil that we have. And it is also reported in Tariq al-Tabari. What does al-Husayn alayhi salam say to the tribes in Basra known as the Akhmas? The Akhmas are the 5 tribes who govern the divisions within Basra. Okay? So you can imagine that the Prophet, during the Prophet's time, what was the biggest problem he had? Trying to stop tribal division and try to bring tribal unity. Look at what is reported in some of our earliest historical sources. Al-Husayn alayhi salam, as he's traveling and as he is trying to convey the message of the Qur'an, he is speaking to different tribes in Basra and in around the region. So first, it's not just, why didn't people follow Husayn alayhi salam? We sometimes ask that, why didn't people stand for Husayn alayhi salam? Because there were different tribes. There was different understandings of who Husayn was. There was different understandings. Well, if Yazid is the ruler, well, who is this Husayn? What is he trying to bring? Okay, we may acknowledge he's the grandson of Rasulullah, but we have a ruler, Yazid ibn Muawiyah. So you can imagine that the same kind of divisions we have today in society between different politicians and why we should support them or not support them, same kind of thinking is there in that society, to put it very simply. And let me just read this out to you, okay? He says, and this was, some sources say that Al-Husayn Islam wrote this to the tribes of Basra, and others say that he spoke this, okay? I'll just go from the middle of the paragraph. He says, أما بعد فإن الله استفى محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم اللهم صل على محمد من خلقه وأكرمه بنبوته واختاره لرسالته ثم قبضه إليها وقد نصح لعباده وبلغ من أرسل به صلى الله عليه وآله وكنا أهله وأولياؤه وورثته وأحق الناس بمقامه في الناس. And in the English, if you can read that middle portion in English, if you can see it, what does Al-Husayn say? Look at how he's approaching the message. We say the message of Karbala, but look how he's approaching the message of the Qur'an and Rasulullah. He says, now indeed, Allah chose Muhammad, may Allah send blessings and peace be upon him and his family, from his creation and honored him with his apostleship or nabuwah and chose him for his message. So he's starting with the Prophet. Husayn al-Islam is going back to the Prophet, trying to establish the link that people had forgotten, and what I saw in Jordan and in around the region, and I think most of the world, that people can forget that Husayn is the Prophet, is resembling the Prophet, is connected with the Prophet, is continuing the line of Rasulullah in his message, principles and character. Then, what does he say? Then he took him, qabada. Qabada means to snatch or take away, but in this context it means Allah returned the Prophet to him, that is death of the Prophet. Allah took him, so the Prophet's life has ended. Then he took him towards himself. He had advised his servants and conveyed what he was sent with. The Prophet did his job. He conveyed the message of the Qur'an. Now that time has ended, right? So look how Husayn is expressing the message of Rasulullah. We love the Prophet and we love Ahlul Bayt, of course. But Husayn is a realist. He says, look, this time of Rasulullah has finished. He has returned to Allah. The Prophet is no more. But I am here, that is Husayn al-Islam, and I'm reminding you of these principles that you have forgotten with his death. That's the subtitles of this letter or this speech. And then Husayn al-Islam continues. He says that, and we are his family, associates and heirs, and we have been the most rightful of people over his position. So the exclusive claim over people is with us. So now Husayn al-Islam is establishing his right to lead the society based on his good character as opposed to the corrupt character of Yazid. And then we find these principles which I talked of. Well, what are these principles of Karbala? Now, sorry, I can't see when I was talking to Irfan, I can't see when I put the glasses on my phone. So, when I was a teenager, I used to ask, well, okay, everybody says, or every person from the member says, Hussein is for justice. We fight for the oppressed. Okay, this is too general. This is too general for me. What exactly was Hussein alayhi salam trying to bring in the society? That's what I want to know. That's what my children want to know. That's what a thinking person and a thinking child wants to know. Why should a child follow Hussein alayhi salam as opposed to Gandhi, as opposed to Malcolm X, as opposed to any reformer? And of course, we know some of these reformers were inspired by Hussein alayhi salam. But a young child with YouTube and social media and Facebook has all the options in the world. So why come to Majalis? Why come for Ashura? Why come for Arba'een? Very valid question by any young person. So we should give them an intellectual answer, right? Hussein alayhi salam gives an intellectual answer. He says that we enjoined or we accepted the position in the society, that is of Yazid. That means we acquiesced at that time, okay, Yazid is the ruler. But what did we see? What did Hussein alayhi salam see that made him stand against Yazid ibn Muawiyah? He says, we the Ahlul Bayt disliked division, exactly what I mentioned at the start of the lecture, which we see between Shia and Sunni, among Sunni, etc. And we loved public welfare. Two very important things. The society at Yazid's time was a divided society. Tribes, a corrupt ruler, poor people and orphans being ignored, and a lack of unity amongst Muslims themselves, which we saw since the time of Al-Hasan al-Islam. In Kitab al-Irshad by Shaykh al-Mufid rahmatullahi alayhi, in one of the khutbahs that Al-Hasan gives, he addresses the people and says, this is not the time to fight. I'm just summarizing, okay? Because there were some people in the camp of Al-Husayn al-Islam that wanted to rise up against Muawiyah. And others were not sure. Others said, no, we should not fight. That resulted in the sulh or the pact between Al-Hasan and Muawiyah. Now, when Al-Hasan finished the khutbah, there was infighting amongst the people in the crowd, and some of them attacked Al-Hasan al-Islam. Now that you will find in the chapter or biography of Al-Hasan al-Islam in Kitab al-Irshad, okay? That was the time of Al-Hasan. So look at the division at the time of Al-Hasan, which continued during the time of Al-Husayn al-Islam. That's why the people of Kufa left Al-Husayn to die on the plains of Karbala. And who were the people of Kufa? Can we call them Shia? Possibly. But as a minimum, we can definitely say that they recognize that Al-Husayn is the grandson of Rasulullah, the son of Ali alayhi salam, and that his character and, if you like, sunnah or adab should be followed. They knew that 100%. That we have as a minimum certainty. Now, whatever title you want to give those people is up to you, up to historians. But as a minimum, the whole reason why they were in communication with Al-Husayn al-Islam through letters is because they recognized his position in the society and the fact that he was the grandson of Rasulullah, yet they left him to die on the plains of Karbala. So something was horribly wrong in that society, that they did not understand the very principles of Islam or the Qur'an, as is the focus of this lecture, which Rasulullah left before his death. Salawat, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? So that you can hopefully read, you can see yourself that in another remark that Al-Husayn gives on his way to Karbala, you can see that he says, O people, indeed the Prophet of Allah, may Allah bless him and his progeny, said, anybody who sees a tyrant ruler who treats the haram prescribed by Allah is halal, infringes his covenant in defiance to the sunnah of the Prophet of Allah, and treats the servants of Allah by means of committing sins and enmity, which is what Yazid was doing, and they do not revolt against him in words or deeds, Allah has every right to drive them to their abode, that is the hellfire. Now, very serious remarks by al-Husayn al-Islam. We sometimes think, at least I used to think, that all the prophets and imams, they were so patient, they were so calm during matters of strife and distress. There was no anger in them. That's false. This is anger. This is the anger of Hussein towards his own people and towards the society for not being just and standing up to a corrupt ruler. Look how courageous al-Husayn is. So to answer the question that young people ask, or my own children ask, well, al-Husayn, as one person or with a few companions around him, few family members, stands up to a corrupt ruler in a time where he didn't have an army, where there was no military aircrafts or anything like that. It was a man in a desert saying these words to people. This is one reason why young people should follow us, al-Husayn al-Islam, who stood by his words and practiced what he preached. In some of the reformers, I mean, you can look at Malcolm X, you can look at Martin Luther King, if you read some of their biographies, they did other things in private that was rather immoral, right? Okay, Allah forgive everybody, no problem. But al-Husayn al-Islam did not do anything immoral in private. What he said, he preached, what he said, he practiced in private as well. So you can already see that the principles of al-Husayn al-Islam, we have three: disliking division, making sure that there is social welfare in society, and three, standing up to tyrant rulers, whether in words or deeds. Still very difficult to do. And just to give you one simple example, when I was going through the border from Jordan to Palestine, it's very normal to get a bit harassed and people ask you questions. And when I went actually for research and to help in whatever small way I could, the Palestinians through various means. But I didn't say that. Because if I had said that, I would be turned back to Jordan. One of my friends who was going there said that he was an intern at some institute, and he gave a bit too much detail. He was turned back. Now, he was American, and he had normal passport and all that, and educational qualifications, everything normal, but he was turned back. Because they don't want anyone, the Israeli government doesn't want anyone to say anything, whether through writing a report, whether through contacting Palestinians, whether through speaking with them through a fence. They don't want any contact at all with them and for us to write about their plight. That's why only more recently Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have done very comprehensive reports calling the actions of Israelis towards Palestinians apartheid. That's I've only seen in recent years. But before that, or maybe before 10 years ago, I don't think this was very common. But the last 5 years, I have seen a shift within human rights organizations to use these words. But I'm just giving you a real life experience that it is very difficult to say things with words or deeds in controlled areas, in occupied areas, because you will be turned back. Salawat, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. This is just two examples. I'm not going to go through it completely. Al-Husayn al-Islam, throughout his journey to Karbala, used verses of the Qur'an for several reasons. One, to justify his action, that he was not disconnected from the Qur'an, that he was not an isolated figure apart from Rasulullah. And two, to give himself confidence and trust and faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his struggles. So in the first verse that you see, I'll just read a portion of it. He says towards the end, this is Surah Al-Yunus, verse 71, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. He says to the people, this is in his first speech on Ashura, this is where he uses these verses of the Qur'an. So conspire together along with your partners, leaving nothing vague in your plan, then carry it out against me without giving me any respite. He's issuing a challenge to the people in Karbala that do what you want, and as a challenge to the enemies, do what you want with me. You may devise as you wish, but Allah is the best of planners. So he is increasing his confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is proven in the next verse, Surah Al-A'raf, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna waliyallahu alladhi nazzala al-kitab wa huwa yatawalla as-salihin. My guardian is indeed Allah, who sent down the book, and he takes care of the righteous. For me, the marvelous aspect of Hussein alayhi salam is not the physical aspect, is not that he stood alone and took the arrows. I think that's, I can't say this, but the physical is the easier thing to do rather than the mental. If somebody gives up mentally and loses faith, then they've lost the battle generally. Like we tell our children, be confident in your exam. Be confident when you go to class. The first thing is the psychological element. This is the psychology of al-Husayn alayhi salam. He has this trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he's going to take care of the righteous. And I think that is very difficult. And I think it developed over this journey in Karbala. It wasn't something instantaneous. He used these verses to comfort himself. He used these verses to increase his iman. He used these verses to increase his trust. How can any human being simply automatically be like this armor and say, right, I'm now on this journey of Karbala, whatever happens, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to lose any trust, I'm not going to feel any pain, I'm not going to be weak. This is totally non-human. Al-Husayn Islam is a human being developing his trust, developing his sabr during this period until Ashura, where he declares, my guardian is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look at this confidence that now culminates on the night of Ashura. Salawat, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Okay. Do I have 10 minutes, or how much time do I have? Or 10? Oh, you tell me when you're tired. No, really. It's Friday night as well. So, are you okay for 10 minutes? But not more than 10 minutes. Okay. So that means 7, 8 minutes. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh dear. Okay. Okay. Let me just give this example. Okay. In the time of the Prophet. Okay. Maybe we'll do this in another lecture, inshallah. In the time of the Prophet, we had similar characters to Yazid ibn Muawiyah, like Walid ibn Mughira. Now, of course, Yazid ibn Muawiyah was the worst, arguably, and you can see this in many of the reports of historians. These verses that you see, I'll just read out a few of them. These verses are from Surah Al-Mudaththir. And the context or the sababun nuzul of these verses, according to both Shia and Sunni Mufassirin, is that Walid ibn Mughira and his tribe was harassing Rasulullah and trying to stop Rasulullah's message. They were harassing him verbally and physically. The first verse that you see, and I'll just deal with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to Rasulullah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Dharni wa man khalaqtu wahida. Leave me and him whom I created alone. So just remember that. Leave me and him whom I created alone. Okay? The person who Allah creates is Walid ibn Mughira. Okay? This is according to all the tafsir. So the sababun nuzul is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intimately aware that Rasulullah is feeling grief and distress. And he wants to do something against Walid ibn Mughira. Okay, please understand this. Rasulullah is feeling distressed, he's feeling angry. He wants to let out his emotion and say, this Walid ibn Mughira is harassing me. Okay? But Allah reveals this verse. Look at the language. Leave me. This is a command to the Prophet. Leave me. That means leave me, that is, leave Allah to do what He wants. Leave me and the one who I created alone. Look how beautiful this verse is. Allah is telling the Prophet, be patient. Don't react. Something we all have to learn. Myself, yourself. Don't react. Leave me, that is Allah, to deal with this person, Walid ibn Mughira. Okay? Who was Walid ibn Mughira? The tribal chief of the Makhzum tribe. He was rich, according to Tafsir al-Safi, by Allama Faid al-Qashani. He had 7 children, and he had an esteemed position in the society. Okay? He felt he could do whatever he wanted. To the extent that in Majm al-Bayan, you will find this qissa there, that, in fact, I'll show you this. You might find it interesting. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Anybody there? No? Okay, I'll just read it out. It's okay. Yeah, you can see the first line. Walid ibn Mughira, he was so jealous of Rasulullah. This is what he said. Wallahu laqad sami'tu min Muhammadin anifan kalaman ma huwa min kalam al-anasi wala min kalam al-jinni. This is actually a line from the historical report of what happened in these verses. He says, by Allah, he says that, indeed I heard from Muhammad a speech that is above, a speech that precedes, a speech that is superior, if you like, that is not from the speech of human beings and that is not from the speech of jinn. Now, Walid, he was an esteemed poet, right? So one, he was jealous of Rasulullah's position, as Yazid was jealous of Hussein's position and his lineage, and the fact that he did have followers, the fact that people did recognize him as the grandson of Rasulullah. And 2, Walid ibn Mughira and others wanted to stop Rasulullah. And in Majm al-Bayan it is reported that when Walid said this, and people heard this, they said, oh, Walid ibn Mughira, you're actually complimenting Rasulullah, you're complimenting his speech, how can this be? You're an esteemed poet. And so they all put pressure on Walid ibn Mughira to try to stop Rasulullah. And they had various plans. So they said, oh, Walid, why don't you call him Majnoon? This is where all this is why in the verses of the Qur'an are very important, because they reflect the historical circumstance of Rasulullah. He said, Walid, call Rasulullah Majnoon, call him crazy. And then he said, no, we can't call him crazy because people know he's not crazy, he's a trader. And they believe he is sane and he does trade. Nobody would believe he's crazy. Okay, call him Kahin. That means call him a soothsayer, a fortune teller. Walid says, no, he doesn't have the attributes of a fortune teller. Okay, call him Sha'ir, call him a poet. No, if you call him a poet, then you'll remove my status as a poet. And this language is not poetry. The language of the Quran is above poetry, right? They conspired against Rasulullah to such an exacting degree that Rasulullah felt so much distress inside. That's why this verse was revealed. Now, we don't often hear this. I mean, I'm just summarizing several tafasir for you. I wanted to go into detail. I can't do that here, okay? The next slide is grammatical analysis. I'm not doing that on a Friday night. I won't be invited again, okay? But I'm just sharing with you that this inner distress that the prophets and imams felt, that's the reason for these verses. That's why the Prophet had an intimate relationship with Allah. And that's why al-Husayn was able to say, Inna waliyallah, indeed Allah is my guardian. Because he could only trust Allah. Only Allah, he felt, could hear his feelings. Allah is Samin Alim. That's what makes al-Husayn great. Beyond all of the physical sacrifice, of course. Salawat, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. I'm going to end on these 2 slides, okay? So, this is the conclusion, okay? From these verses, what do we find? that God is the all-powerful, independent creator. Allah is the one who creates Walid alone. Okay? And secondly, God responds to good and bad actions of his creation. I wanted to go into this, but I'm just summarizing. That means God truly does respond to the Prophet and al-Husayn alayhi salam. God is ever present within his creation, affecting our actions. Now, I don't know how to answer this, so I'm leaving you with this, is that at the end of his life, Walid ibn Mughira lost his wealth, 3 of his children submitted to Islam, and he lost his position in society. Yazid, when he killed Hussein alayhi salam, he was still in power, but he died shortly after. I think in his late 30s he died, and within 60 years the Umayyad government collapsed. I'm still trying to answer this, that how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affect actions of creation to the extent that, let's say I do something unjust to you, and sometimes we might say that injustice comes back to me. How does that happen? I'm always trying to understand this. Is it through angels? Is it through cause and effect? Is it through karma? Is it through I'm creating depressed feelings for myself and something's going to come back to me because I have a negative state? These are all psychological cosmic questions. But I'm posing this with you because this is what happened to Walid ibn Mughira. Rasulullah did not lift a finger, and Walid ibn Mughira lost his position, and 3 of his children submitted to Islam. You'll find this in Tafsir al-Safi, okay? So there is clearly something that Allah does through the creation, which means Allah is ever present in his creation. And I'm always trying to understand these verses, that how does Allah work through the creation, and how did the Prophet and Hussein Islam trust Allah to accept their fate? To accept their fate, that even being alone on the plains of Karbala, people abandoning him, he still has the strength to stand up to Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Salawat. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. My dear brothers and sisters, the night of Arba'een is the night of remembrance of Hussein alayhi salam, the grief of Hussein, the distress of Hussein, as I explained, and how they were able to trust Allah in such torrid circumstances. To the extent that in Ziyaratun Nahiya, it is reported, or this is the way that the 12th Imam gives salams to the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, and to the Ashab of Hussein and the family of Hussein. He says, As-salamu ala dima'is sa'ilat. Peace be upon you, O the flowing blood. He doesn't just name Hussein. We say, As-salamu alayka ya Hussein, we may say. He says, peace be upon you to the flowing blood. As-salamu ala al-a'dha'il muqatta'at. Peace be upon you to the cut, to the separated bones. As-salamu ala ru'usil mushalat. Peace be upon you to the raised heads, because Hussein's head was cut and raised and then carried through Kufa and Sham. This was the fate of Hussein alayhi salam. Yet he had the patience and trust to say, Inna waliyallah. As-salamu ala niswatil barizat. Peace be upon you, O the exposed women, because the women were exposed and in chains. If we are to remember Karbala, we should remember not just the names and those who sacrificed their lives, but their blood, their body, their bodily parts, their heads, and their clothes, because they were drenched in blood. For what? For the sake of unity at a time where we still experience disunity in the Ummah. Our 8th Imam alayhi salam says, as reported in Ulul Akhbar Rida, he says, Ya Ibn Shabib, إن كنت باكيا لشيء فأبكي للحسين فإنه ذبح كما يذبح الكبش. Says, oh Ibn Shabib, if you want to cry for anything, then just cry for Hussein. Indeed, he was slaughtered like a sheep is slaughtered. For who was Hussein? Hussein alayhi salam was the man, the innocent man, the righteous man who stood alone on the plains of Karbala, leaving his daughter Sakina salamullahi alayha, leaving his son Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, leaving the women of the tent. Imagine a daughter that cannot hug her father anymore, and the last touch of Hussein's daughter to his armor, saying, Father, Father, don't go. Don't leave us. Imagine the feelings of Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, who is ill in the tent and cannot defend his father because of his frailty. How would a son feel that he cannot protect his father? Imagine Zainab salamullahi alayha losing her sons, now losing her brother, and yet she has to be the commander in the tent. She has to keep the morale of the tent. This is how Hussein left his tent. And when he went on the plains of Karbala, this is why the 8th Imam says, فَإِنَّهُ ذُبِحَ كَمَا يُذْبَحُ الْكَبْشِ. He was slaughtered like a sheep is slaughtered. Because just as a sheep has that beautiful, innocent white wool, and that wool should not be stained and has not harmed any other animal, then Hussein alayhi salam was like a sheep being surrounded and his wool being cut and stained with his own blood, and the animal being cut, his head being cut as if he is being slaughtered to be eaten. This is how the descendants of Hussein remember the great-great-great-grandfather Hussein, that today the night of Arba'een is the remembrance of not just the names, but their bodily parts and also what they stood for. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Rabbana la taj'alna ma'a qawmi dhalimin. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to please do not make us like the unjust people. O Allah, we ask you to please bring unity in society. We ask you to give us strength to help those who are oppressed. O Allah, please help us reform our actions and character in the way of Hussein alayhi salam, and please help us understand your beautiful book, the Qur'an, inshallah. Surah Al-Fatiha, please.
देखो तो ए मेरे नाना, न रहे मेरे बेटे ना भैया, सारा कुनबा लौटा के मैं आई, अपनी किस्मत सुनाने को आई। ज़ैनब हाय ज़ैनब हाय ज़ैनब हाय ज़ैनब, ज़ैनब हाय ज़ैनब हाय ज़ैनब हाय ज़ैनब। खुश्क कूज़े लिए प्यासे बच्चे अलतश की सदा लेके आए, बांध कर मश्क को एक अलम से गाजी बेतेग मक्तल में आए। उनकी कुव्वत थी कूज़े के अंदर, بہ گیا مشک سے تیر کھا کر سو گیا دونوں بازو گھٹا کے دے گیا وہ بھی داغ جدائی زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ابن شیر خدا سا دلاور کوئی تاریخ میں ہے نہ ایسا جو تھا بی بی کے پردے کا ضامن اپنے بازو کٹا کے وہ سویا اس کے مرنے سے اے میرے نانا ہو گئی بی بیاں سر برہنا ثانی فاطمہ کا کھلا سر دیکھتی تھی ہائے سب خدائی زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب میری اماں کی طرح بھی ہائے تو ہی بیٹے تھے بس پاس میرے مثل زہرا بھی کرب و بلا میں دے دیا ان کو دی کو بچانے آئے انبار ظالم کے لشکر گھیرا اونو محمد کو آ کر ہر طرف سے ہوا آئے حملہ ہو گئے وہ بھی شہب فدائی زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہر قدم راہ شام اور کوفہ نازیت کی کوئی کمی تھی ہر قدم پہ تھی پتھر کی بارش نہر خون جسم سے بہ رہی تھی یاد ہے کہ یہی میں نے سوچا اس گھڑی جب میرا سر جھکا تھا کل تھی کوفے کی میں شاہزادی آج قیدی ہوں میں بن کے آئی زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب نانا اس وقت میں مر گئی تھی پہنچی دربار کے جب میں در پر تخت سے پوچھا ظالم بتاؤ تم میں سے کون ہے بنت حیدر بولی عباس کی ہوں میں خواہر لوٹ جاؤں گی تجھ کو مٹا کر باپ کے لہجے میں دے کے خطبہ میں نے ظالم کی مسند ہلائی زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب ہائے زینب
زيارة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا نبي الله. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا محمد بن عبد الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك وعلى زوجة وفية الغراء خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين. السلام عليك وعلى ابن عمك أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صي رسول رب العالمين. السلام عليك وعلى بضعتك الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك وعلى ولديك الإمامين الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى أئمة المسلمين من ذرية ولدك الحسين علي السجاد ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى الكاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد الجواد وعلي الهادي والحسن العسكري والحجة ابن الحسن المهدي. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا صاحب الزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك واجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك والمستشهدين بين يديك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل ولي حجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقاعدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. فصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. Just a couple of final announcements before we finish tonight. Firstly, next week we have Shaykh Niyaaz who'll be speaking to us on dhikr in the Qur'an, and on the Sunday we have Shaykh Ayub Rashid who'll be speaking to us on the death anniversary of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And final announcement: there are a number of books here which you may want to purchase. They are from they're written by authored by Dr. Shaykh Panjwani and edited by Dr. Imranali Panjwani, the speaker today. And it's about the Khoja Shia nationaries of East Africa and their quest for a new socio-religious identity. So if you'd like to purchase any of these books, please come and talk to a member of the executive committee. Salaat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad.